I want to return for one last time to this subject of whether it's okay to gossip and whether there's positive or negative gossip by telling you about a study that recently was published in the New York Times, took place at Dartmouth University. There were individuals who took place in the study that were divided into groups of 6 people, and they were each given money, and in each round they were told they could either keep the money or they could put the money into the pot and benefit the group as a whole. The catch to this was that players were each given each other's cell phone numbers, and they could text back and forth private messages to each other about who was putting in, who was choosing not to put in, and thus there was a little bit of gossip taking place in the background. And the Dartmouth University study reached 2 conclusions about the nature of when gossip can be considered positive. The first one, it links to an argument that Yuval Harari makes in his book Sapiens, where he argues that gossip is a way to create social binding, and it can also drive vicarious learning. That's when gossip can be positive. In other words, you gossip, as I mentioned earlier, when you move to a neighborhood for the very first time and want to find out more about the rules and the folkways and the norms of your neighborhood. Some of you know, live in a neighborhood with people from all over the world, different ethnicities and rules and the like. And I will tell you that when I first got there, we had a neighborhood picnic. And one of the neighbors came over and had brought, shawarma she had made. She was from Lebanon. And she said, I just wanted you to make sure you knew that the meat was kosher. Well, obviously she either asked somebody or she knew that Jews ate kosher, and there was some gossiping that probably took place to make sure that was okay. We still didn't need it because she got confused between kosher and halal, never mind you, but the intent was good, and I think that was a really good thing. Similarly, right, do I need to stay off that guy's lawn because he spends hours cutting it and taking care of it meticulously? In many ways, this is the personality of my mother that we like to joke is called the Yenta, right? Y'all picture the old movies and the shtetl and the Yenta sharing and kibitzing and sharing news about the community. It wasn't maliciously intended. It was intended to build social cohesion, to drive vicarious learning, and to bring different groups of people together. That's the first way that gossip can be considered positive. Second, gossip can be considered healthy when it comes as a way for people to discern social norms and when it can succeed in aligning people on common social behaviors. So in other words, gossip is like a temperature check from people about the world at large. So-and-so did this. Does this mean that I can do it too, or I should be doing this too? I heard so-and-so gave to the Capitol campaign at Eitz Chaim. Does this mean that I have to be doing it also, right? Social pressure. I saw that Rabbi Drash had non-hechshered cheese in his cart at the grocery store. Does that mean that's an acceptable way of keeping kosher? Does this mean that the rules have changed? I saw so-and-so at the grocery store not wearing a mask anymore. And come to think of it, I've seen lots of people not wearing masks. Does this mean that the rule has changed, right, for society versus what it was before? According to the Dartmouth study, this is healthy, constructive gossip. It clarifies what people's roles are and lets us know what to do. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, there's the other side to this argument, and as all of you mentioned so eloquently, that is the spies. Their reports that they give are not designed to create any sense of social cohesion among the Jewish people. It's gossip that's deliberately intended to create a very divisive situation among the Israelites, and in fact, it does that. It was also not designed not to clarify. If anything, its message obfuscates, right? It's confusing, it's contradictory. The spies start by saying that Israel is a land of milk and honey, but then they go on to talk about the fact that it's not conquerable, it's not good. Well, which is it? It's not entirely clear. I want to conclude this morning by bringing these 3 wonderful, interesting recommendations that the New York Times article had about how we can determine for ourselves whether the gossip that we do is constructive versus destructive. 3 personal checks that we can all use. It's not the Chafetz Chaim, but maybe an in the middle ground about how we're supposed to speak. The first conclusion that the Times article brings is that we need to consider our intention personally, as many of you mentioned, when we gossip. There's a Buddhist teaching that talks about 5 gatekeepers of speech, which are really 5 questions that we need to ask ourselves before we speak. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? Is it necessary? And most importantly, is it the right time? Take our shopping cart example. I saw Rabbi Dorsch with non-hechshered cheese in his shopping cart. It's probably true. It's parv on the kindness. It is a matter of intent. It's hard to tell. It could be beneficial. It could be a teachable moment, especially if you're studying or learning how to keep kosher. It's great. It could be necessary, and it could be the right time. For you, it's probably the right time. For me, it may not be a great time. Although, like I said, I feel like sometimes I hold office hours at Kroger. Now compare this to the spies. It was a half-truth. It was not kind. It was not beneficial. It might have been necessary, but the timing could not have been worse, as it demoralized the Jewish people as they entered the land of Israel. Conclusion number 2 from the Times article is that if you want to determine if your gossip is good or bad, consider the merits and the source. Imagine, for example, the person that comes to you in the supermarket and sees the rabbi with non-hechshered cheese is a Jew by choice. And they come to you, or maybe somebody studying to be a Jew, and they say, I saw the rabbi doing that. Is that right? Well, that's a wonderful source. That person may be trying to learn, or if it's somebody who's on a Jewish journey, that's a good source. And I would answer that question with pleasure. Now imagine it's somebody who has no deeply curious about Judaism. They just like to complain a lot. Well, that's a very different conversation. Conclusion number 3. When you tell your gossip, consider your own motives. If it's negative or it doesn't serve any actionable purpose, as the Chafetz Chaim would say, keep it to yourself. But if it's for a good reason, if it has a good purpose, share it. And that's why I gave my Bikor Cholim example a little bit earlier today. Technically, if someone comes to me and says, did you hear that so-and-so is in the hospital, or not even to me, but shares it with somebody else, perhaps it's being done with very good intent. It's so that we can bring food to that person and care for that person, give them the TLC that they need to help them on their road to recovery. So that's a very different kind of gossip. When people ask me, did you hear about so-and-so, it's generally because they want me to check in on so-and-so, not because they're concerned that I'm going to gossip and go spread it around to everybody else. I think that, therefore, a new term this morning, I'd like to dub a new term this morning. We spent an awful time talking about Lashon Hara. I'd like to dub a new term, and that is Lashon Hatov. There are times we must remember that our tongue can be used for good. And I think that having given this all consideration, this parasha and this article this week, I hope and I pray that we go out into the world this Shabbat and always and use our Lashon, use our tongue to do good. Constructive gossip, if you will. And if you come up with another term, please let Lou and I know. Shabbat Shalom.